There are tales that we share in hushed tones, stories that creep into our collective consciousness and make us question the boundaries between the known and the unknown. These tales often begin innocuously, an old folk tale, a whispered rumor, or a warning passed down from generation to generation. Yet, within these stories lies a kernel of something deeply unsettling, something that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Among these tales, there exists a particularly chilling one, a story that revolves around a seemingly ordinary phone number, one that you should never, under any circumstances, answer. At first glance, it's just a string of digits, no different from any other number in your contact list, or a missed call notification that pops up on your screen. But what if this number held the power to reach beyond the veil of our reality? What if, by simply answering this call, you were inviting something malevolent into your life, something that defies logic and reason, something that feeds on your deepest fears? This is the tale of the cursed phone number, a deadly call that connects you to something far more sinister than just another voice on the other end. Those who have encountered it describe an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling that they are being watched, hunted by something unseen but undeniably present. The number itself has no consistent pattern, no recognizable area code, and it seems to change form with each person it targets. But the outcome is always the same. Once you answer the call, your life is irrevocably altered. Tonight, we delve deep into the mysterious and terrifying accounts of those who made the mistake of answering this call and the horrors that followed. As you listen to these stories, remember that they serve as a warning, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored, and that some calls should never be answered. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's no denying the chilling reality faced by those who fell victim to this cursed number. The origins of the curse. The legend of the cursed phone number has been whispered about for decades, passed down from generation to generation, like an urban legend that refuses to die. According to the story, the curse began with a man named Richard Adams in the late 1980s. Richard was an ordinary man living in a small, uneventful town. He was a businessman, married with 2 children, and by all accounts, he led a normal life. However, Richard had a dark secret. He was deeply in debt, and his life was spiraling out of control. Desperate, he turned to a shady loan shark who promised him a way out. The deal was simple. Richard would receive a substantial sum of money to pay off his debts, but he had to repay it within a month, with an interest rate that bordered on the impossible. Feeling trapped, Richard agreed. Days turned into weeks, and the deadline loomed over Richard like a shadow. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't gather the money he needed. One night, in a fit of desperation, Richard received a call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was calm, almost soothing, as it offered him a way out, a way to escape his crushing debt. The voice was like a lifeline in a sea of despair. It spoke with an eerie clarity, promising that all his problems would disappear if he followed its instructions. Richard, teetering on the edge of hopelessness, found himself drawn to the promise of salvation. All Richard had to do was pass on the phone number to someone else, someone desperate enough to answer the call. The voice assured him that his debts would be erased, his troubles lifted, if he could just convince another soul to take the bait. In his state of despair, Richard agreed. He shared the number with an acquaintance who was in a similar financial predicament. This acquaintance, too, was drowning in debt and grasped at the offer without hesitation. Shortly after, Richard vanished without a trace. His family was left with no explanation, and his debts were mysteriously settled. But that was just the beginning. The cursed phone number began to circulate, passed from one desperate soul to another. Each time, the story was the same. The person who answered the call would disappear shortly after, and their debts or problems would miraculously vanish. But those left behind knew the truth. Those who answered the call were paying a far greater price. The curse began to spread like wildfire. It reached far beyond the small town where Richard Adams had lived, snaking its way through cities and across state lines. Some say it was even reported in different countries. each new victim unaware of the horror that awaited them. The number became a shadowy specter, an untraceable threat that could strike at any moment. Those who knew of its existence avoided it at all costs, but for others, those who were desperate, those who had reached the end of their rope, it was a beacon of false hope, a mirage in the desert of their despair. As the legend grew, so did the fear surrounding the cursed number. Stories began to circulate about the origins of the voice on the other end. Some claimed it was the spirit of a vengeful entity, a being from another dimension who thrived on the misery of its victims. Others believed it was the manifestation of pure evil, a force that had existed since the dawn of time, waiting for the right moment to strike. But no matter the theory, one thing was clear: the cursed phone number was no ordinary threat. It was a portal to something far darker than anyone could have imagined: the unfortunate victims. As the years went by, the cursed phone number became something of a myth, a ghost story told around campfires or whispered about in darkened rooms. But every myth has its victims, those unfortunate enough to cross paths with the curse. One such victim was Sarah, a young woman struggling to make ends meet. She was a waitress at a rundown diner, barely scraping by on tips, and burdened with medical bills from her ailing mother. Sarah was desperate for a solution, and in her desperation, she confided in a coworker about her troubles. A few days later, Sarah received a text message from an unknown number. The message simply read, "Call me, I can help." At first, she dismissed it as a prank, but as the days passed and her situation grew more dire, she began to wonder if there was something to it. Against her better judgment, Sarah dialed the number. The voice that answered was soft, almost comforting. It promised her relief from her financial burdens, a chance to start over. All she had to do was pass on the number to someone else in need. Sarah, blinded by desperation, agreed. In the days that followed, Sarah's life took a dramatic turn. Her mother's medical bills were mysteriously paid off, and she received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative she had never even met. But just as quickly as her fortunes improved, Sarah began to notice strange occurrences: objects moving on their own, shadows lurking in the corners of her vision, and the persistent feeling of being watched. One night, Sarah received another call from the same number. This time, the voice was different, darker, more menacing. It whispered to her, telling her that her time was running out. Terrified, Sarah tried to block the number, but it was no use. The calls kept coming, each one more disturbing than the last. Eventually, Sarah confided in her best friend, Emily, who suggested they visit a psychic to find out more about the curse. The psychic, an elderly woman with piercing eyes, warned Sarah that she had made a grave mistake by answering the call. The only way to escape the curse, she said, was to pass the number on to someone else. Desperate and afraid, Sarah did as she was told. She shared the number with a man she knew from the diner, a man who was struggling with his own demons. Shortly after, Sarah disappeared, just like those before her. No one could explain her sudden absence, but those who knew her well understood that the curse had claimed another victim. But Sarah's story is not unique. Over the years, countless others have fallen prey to the cursed number. Some tried to fight it, others attempted to pass it on, but the outcome was always the same: disappearance, death, or worse. Take, for example, the story of Mark, a successful lawyer who had it all: money, power, and a seemingly perfect life. But beneath the surface, Mark was hiding a secret. He was involved in illegal activities, and when his world began to crumble, he received a call from the cursed number. At first, Mark thought he could outsmart the curse. He used his connections to try and trace the number, to find out who was behind the calls. But the deeper he dug, the more his life unraveled. His colleagues turned against him, his family abandoned him, and his health deteriorated rapidly. The curse seemed to consume him from the inside out. In the end, Mark was found dead in his office, a look of sheer terror frozen on his face. His phone was clutched in his hand, the cursed number displayed on the screen. No one could explain what had happened, but those who knew the legend understood that the curse had claimed yet another soul. The horrors of the call. What makes the cursed phone number truly terrifying is the nature of the call itself. Those who have survived, if you can call it that, describe the experience as something otherworldly, a direct connection to a force far beyond our comprehension. One survivor, a man named Thomas, recounted his experience in a chilling interview. Thomas was an investigator who specialized in the paranormal, and he had heard rumors of the cursed number for years. Driven by curiosity and a desire to uncover the truth, he decided to investigate the legend for himself. Thomas managed to obtain the cursed number through a series of contacts in the underground paranormal community. Armed with his equipment and a determination to document everything, he dialed the number and prepared for the worst. What he experienced was beyond anything he could have imagined. The moment the call connected, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the air grew thick with an oppressive, suffocating energy. The voice on the other end was unlike anything he had ever heard, a deep, guttural whisper that seemed to vibrate through his very soul. The voice spoke to Thomas, revealing things about his life that no one could possibly know, his deepest fears, his darkest secrets. It taunted him, mocked him, and promised him a fate worse than death. As the call continued, Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if he was being pulled into a dark void from which there was no escape. But the true horror came when the voice began to speak in the voices of those Thomas had lost, his deceased parents, his childhood friend who had died in a tragic accident, even his beloved dog. The voice mimicked them perfectly, calling out to him, begging him to join them in the darkness. Thomas tried to end the call, but his phone refused to hang up. It was as if the connection had taken on a life of its own, binding him to the voice on the other end. Desperate, he smashed his phone against the wall, finally breaking the connection. But the damage had been done. In the days that followed, Thomas was plagued by nightmares, visions of the dark void that had nearly consumed him. He became a shell of his former self, haunted by the voices he had heard during the call. His once vibrant personality faded, replaced by a deep, unshakable fear. Thomas eventually withdrew from the paranormal community, warning others to stay far away from the cursed number. But his warning came too late for many, as the number continued to claim victims, each one more tormented than the last. The final toll. The cursed phone number is not just a story, it is a living nightmare, a force that preys on the vulnerable and the desperate. Those who answer the call are marked, their lives forever altered by the dark power that lies on the other end. Some say that the curse will continue to spread, that as long as there are people in need, the cursed number will find new victims. Others believe that the curse is a test, a trial of sorts, to see who can resist the temptation and who will succumb to the darkness. But one thing is certain, the cursed phone number is no mere myth. It is a real and terrifying phenomenon that has left a trail of tragedy in its wake. The voices of those who have answered the call still echo in the darkness, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. So, the next time your phone rings and you see an unfamiliar number, think twice before you answer. It could be a telemarketer, a wrong number, or even a friend calling from a new phone. But if you hear a voice that seems too calm, too soothing, offering you something too good to be true, hang up. Because some calls are more than just a voice on the other end. Some calls are a gateway to something far more sinister, something that could drag you into a nightmare from which you may never wake up. The legend of the cursed phone number serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of our reality. It is a story of desperation, of people pushed to their limits and beyond, of the dark forces that feed on our fears and weaknesses. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the story of the cursed phone number is a cautionary tale, a warning to be careful what you wish for and to never, ever answer a call from a number you don't recognize, because you never know what might be waiting for you on the other end.